mankind won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that. But mankind won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that. But mankind won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that.
Boa tarde. Na verdade, no
Good
Brasil
afternoon.
começa de
Actually,
noite,
in
final de tarde
Brazil,
por aqui.
we are
Espero
in the
que
beginning
seja
of the
um
evening,
dia
the
bom para
end of the
todos nas suas
afternoon. I
casas, nos
hope
seus horários.
everyone is having a
Saúdo
nice
a todos,
day,
todas e todes. A gente
whatever
vai
time
começar
it is,
agora
where you
mais
are.
uma das palestras
Hello,
principais do
everybody.
Seminário
We are going to
Internacional
start
Políticas
one
Habitacionais e
of
Aluguel
our
Social. A
keynote
gente já teve
lectures
aqui
in
Raquel
the
Ronick,
International
Lucy
Social Housing
Cavalheiro,
Seminar.
Marnie
We had
Brady, e
Raquel
essa é a última
Ronick, Lucy
palestra da
Caballero,
semana.
Marnie
E
Brady, and
amanhã a
this will
gente ainda
be
tem
our
duas
last
mesas, uma pela
keynote
manhã,
speaker of the week. And
sobre locação
tomorrow we're
social,
still going to have
e
two
outra à
panels,
tarde.
one
E
in the
aí
morning
a
about
gente fecha
social
esse seminário.
rent
Estamos
and
muito
one in the
felizes de
afternoon.
tê-los aqui, sejam muito
And we're very
bem-vindos.
happy
Eu vou me
that to
apresentar
have you here with
novamente, Paula
us.
Santoro,
I'll
professora da
introduce
Faculdade
myself
de
again. I'm
Arquitetura e
Paula
Urbanismo da
Santoro. I
USP,
am a professor in
integro a
the
coordenação
architecture and
coletiva do
urbanism
LabCidade
course
e
of
também
the
sou a
University of São
pesquisadora
Paulo. I'm
responsável pelo projeto
part
de
of
pesquisa
the
ao qual esse meta
organization of
vinculado.
Labcidades, and I'm also
É um
responsible for the
seminário
research
que faz
project
parte de um
to
projeto
which the
desenvolvido
seminar
em
is linked.
parceria
It's a
da FAO
seminar that's
USP,
part of a
Faculdade de
project
Arquitetura e Urbanismo da
developed in
Universidade
partnership
de São
between the
Paulo, com a
architecture and
Secretaria de
urbanism
Habitação da Prefeitura
course
Municipal de
of
São
the
Paulo,
University of São Paulo
apoiado
and the
pelo
local
Programa de
government of
Pesquisas em Políticas
São Paulo,
Públicas da
supported
Fundação
by the
para a
Research and
Pesquisa no
Public
Estado de
Policies
São Paulo,
program
a
of the
FAPESP,
Foundation of
que
Support
a
to
gente começou
Research
esse
in the state of
projeto
São
desde
Paulo,
abril
FAPESP.
desse ano.
And we
Então, assim,
started this
agradeço os
project in April
apoiadores, a
this year.
FAPESP,
And so
e
I'd like to
agradeço
thank
também a
the
Rosa Luxemburgo
supporters,
e ao
FAPESP,
Observatório
and also the
Global de
Rosa
Aluguéis
Luxemburgo
Temporários,
Foundation
que
and the
estão
Global
apoiando
Observatory of
esse
Temporary
evento
Rent
e hoje
for supporting
lançaram o
this event.
Observatório Global
And
no
today,
Cairo,
the
onde o
Global
Miguel
Observatory
está,
was
e ele estava na
launched in
mesa,
Cairo,
então
where
estamos
Miguel
aqui
is,
nos
currently
encontrando
is,
no
and he
mundo
was part
virtual
of that
novamente.
launch. So
Feliz
now we
de
see each
ver
other
esse
online
intercâmbio
once again,
acontecer.
and I'm happy to see
Vamos
this
lá. Quem
exchange
é o
happening.
Miguel? Por que o Miguel
So, who
que
is
encerra aqui
Miguel,
o
and
nosso
why is
seminário?
Miguel
Miguel
closing
Robles-Durán
our seminar
é
today?
mexicano,
Miguel
nasceu na Ciudad
Robles-Durán
de México,
is
é um
Mexican.
urbanista,
He was born in
teórico,
Mexico City.
designer e
He's
educador.
an
Ele é
urbanist,
podcaster
an
também.
academic, a designer, an
Vamos
educator,
ver
and
como
a
ele
podcaster.
performa hoje,
Let's see
é,
how he
direto do
does
Cairo.
today,
Mas ele é,
speaking
eu
to us
diria, um
straight
public
from
intellectual,
Cairo, but he's a
reconhecido
public
pela sua abordagem
intellectual, I would say,
transdisciplinar da
recognized for
urbanização,
his
integrando ecologia, política
transdisciplinary
urbana,
approach to
economia política
urbanization,
marxista, geografia urbana
integrating
crítica e
Marxist
política urbana
political economy,
progressista. Ele
critical
hoje ocupa uma posição
geography, and
estável
progressive
como
urban
professor
policy.
associado de
He's
urbanismo da
currently
USP,
a professor of urbanism at New School, Parsons School of Design in New York, US, where he leads the urban graduate programs. Before that, he taught at TU Delft at Berlage Institute in the Arts University of Zurich. In 2019, he was the co-founder of the Urban Front, an international urban consultancy that, among others, had Harvey as a member, collaborating with progressive governments to promote right to the city. The work and design by Robles-Durán has been exhibited in institutions like MoMA, the and his next book, Challenges and Personalization Between Crises, should be launched next year. So, a long resume, but first and foremost, I'd like to thank him for making himself available to talk to us today from Cairo, from the World Urban Forum. I know that it's a lot of work to address us in the evening, but it's a pleasure to have you here, Miguel, and you have the floor. You have 30 minutes to give your presentation, and I'll let you know when you're close
Thank
to
you very much.
the end.
It was decided that I will be speaking in English, but I can try to speak slowly if that's a thing. If I decide to show a presentation, the presentation will be in Spanish because originally we thought we would make this in Spanish, but for the moment, I think I want to start by thanking obviously Paula and to tell you that we are very big fans of a lot of the work that you are doing right now. And I was just with some of your colleagues from Sao Paulo that are with Polis. I mean, the director of Polis. And I have also known Raquel for Rachel, let's call it Raquel Rolnik, all for some time, and we've always used many of the things that have been produced by I guess friends of yours in Brazil to fight for housing rights and the right to housing, which for many of us are a big part of course, of what David Harvey enunciated as the right to the city, taking, of course, that uh, like very resounding sort of section, the right to the city, from Henri Lefebvre. But in this occasion, because I have to say, on one hand, I'm very inspired by being here in Cairo, and on the other hand, I am very not inspired. As a matter of fact, I was in a situation today where I just wanted to leave, right? I could not take this anymore. And it is a very contradictory sort of a space that I am right now, because I'm in a event that it belongs and it's sponsored by the United Nations, in which a lot of large multinational banks and interests are involved, and where the number one, I could say, the number one theme of discussion has to do with SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, which many of you that have read some United Nations lingo could already detect. And then masked in this idea of the Sustainable Development Goals is, of course, the thing that brought us to form Urban Front, which is capital, capitalism. I mean, we've been very staunch and very strong critics of the what we call the bullshit language, of global, I would say, assistentialist industries such as the United Nations and UN Habitat, but also all the other organizations and foundations that belong to it, because in their use of words such as resilience, sustainability, community participation, people power, whatever you want to call it, they have actually managed for many, many decades to to clean their actions that are mostly embedded within the logic of capitalism. And I think it is precisely that that brought us together to see if it was possible to form an organization that would focus specifically on supporting whatever we deem would be anti-capitalist. And by mentioning the anti-capitalist is, I think, also very important to say that, well, we decided also to work solely with large organizations, majoritarily governments. And so a lot of the work that we have tried to do is we reaching out only to left-leaning or progressive governments that have a desire or an idea that they want to produce a much more just environmentally and socially environment, and be there to support and to emphasize and to help them make even more radical steps that we feel are necessary. So if a government from the left wants to do, let's say, I don't know, build 1,000 houses, our push would be, okay, you build 1,000 houses, but you have to do it with, I don't know, self-management, autogestion, or it could be obviously through a non-speculative framework of property. I mean, with developing of land trusts, of cooperatives, all kinds of solidarity economies, etc. Things that we believe are not the main principle of capital, which is, of course, to extract profit. No? So when in 2019, after working together for many, many years, David Harvey and myself decided to start this organization. And it was out of a very particular experience. Um, when David Harvey and I were working from 2014 to 2017, 18, more or less around there, invited by the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, to help him set up a research center. And we agreed because it was an open, it was really an open, very flexible thing that they promised. It was well funded, so we could actually work with serious researchers and pay them well. And it was supposed to be an independent body, right? In which what we proposed to Rafael Correa at that time was to be a monitor or an observatory for what he would be calling later anti-neoliberal or non-neoliberal policies, mostly embedded in the territory. We did very little work in the specific realm of the unit of the city, but we like to call, of course, urbanization as something that is way bigger than the city. And a lot of the work we did was with economic chains. So we were working on looking at what the policies of Rafael Correa were impacting, I don't know, the cacao production and the distribution chains and the labor structures, etc., or flowers, or their different industries, including knowledge industries like the development of new universities in different specific regions, so the extraction of oil in the Amazon, etc. And our focus was mostly on developing reports and recommendations on what we deemed was the production of uneven geographical or uneven territorial development. And it was that experience of working so closely with the president of a country, with the main ministers of the country, that we also uncovered who actually has the ear of the presidents, of the governors, of the mayors of cities. And in the case of Ecuador, but also in the case of many other places that we have worked in, it has always been very clear to us that who has the ear of the politicians are these organizations that since the dawn of neoliberalism, which we would say early 80s, well, it was 79, Margaret Thatcher and then Ronald Reagan, but in the early 80s when it was like the policies were starting to be implemented, it was majoritarily the creation of a specific body of knowledge production that will replace or that would replace the knowledge bodies that existed inside city governments. You know, we all should remember that you know, one of the main objectives of neoliberalism is to privatize, right? And the privatization of research was a very important part of the neoliberal project. No? So let's say if the city of Paris would have I don't know, 1,000 people working in their planning and research department on cities. Right now it has 200, 150, and the rest is given to transnational consultancies, which were basically born, at least in the urban realm in that era, or those that worked on banking and finance, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte, etc., started to work very heavily on the urban field. So by the time that we're in the late 90s, early 2000, most of the governments, the city governments around the world, were hiring these large consultancy firms to take decisions on every aspect of urbanization, from transportation to mobility to all things, you know, that we can think of that have to do with cities, no? After it had the whole domination or like this private industries of that we, you know, call the neoliberal consultancy bodies, of course, they started to mix together with the other objectives of these bodies, which were, of course, the production of more surplus and the permission of private bodies, of private corporations, of private banks to profit from urbanization more than they had ever profited before. No? And so it was very clear from the very beginning. I mean, we don't need to be too much of a researcher to understand that the project was to bring urbanization as close as possible to a form of commodity trading and a commodity that would allow not only the accumulation of wealth in the sense of the classic Marxian sense, which is as fixed capital, but also bring it as a form of liquid capital in which its investment on the city was going to be profitable, a very profitable situation. It's very difficult to talk to young students, for example, when we tell them that there was a time not long ago where the investment in housing was not in the private industry, right? And now it seems that it has been there forever, you know? Or the investment in the transportation, in sewage, in all kinds of infrastructures that they need, because there were, it depends on what country, but there were national enterprises, so there were government-driven enterprises that were replaced by these private. Now, what David Harvey and myself saw in our work in Ecuador, and then before this, work in Barcelona with the government of Ada Colau, and other things, is that these consultancies were very pervasive, and that that we needed to take that step to replace those consultancies and to provide an alternative of research that is more sided to what progressive governments want. So basically, the task, which we laugh now, but at the origins of the conception of Urban Front, was to create a McKinsey of the left, right? And a global consultancy agency that would support all governments that wanted to do things that have to do with the right to the city. Now, of course, it's not that easy because, or it has not been very easy because one thing that most people don't realize is that what McKinsey and Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers and Boston Consulting and all of these bring is not only knowledge on how to gentrify or how to produce shopping malls or pedestrian streets or bicycle lanes, but they also bring the money. So these organizations clearly are very linked with banks and with lenders that they hook up with mayors and say, look, I think that we recommend that you build this bridge. And guess what? We have the perfect person for you to build this bridge, and then they will finance it, right? And so realizing this, of course, the possibility of becoming a McKinsey of the left was not that real, no? Because sadly, linking capital with development, but from a left organization is not something that it's, it's a bit contradictory too. So we're trying to advance on this. And one very important sort of form of or aspect that we wanted to focus, because we focus in a lot of things, not only in what we're going to be talking later. I mean, I'm going to be talking, which is housing, but definitely we saw that housing had to be a very, very, very important component of the forms of support we needed to give to governments that wanted to work with us. No? And the support that we thought it was necessary was, again, as I started, to convince them that it was possible to produce housing that did not produce money, and that at the same time it will be okay. No, that the objective of that housing unit was not profit. It was actually what Marx would call a use capital, a use value, sorry, which is the use value of it, which is housing and it's as itself, not as a commodity. We decided to, in this focus, to work and to approach different governmental institutions, and with also the realization that David Harvey also talks about, that that privatization, that making all urbanization a business, perhaps the two largest parts of this in global capital, in global neoliberal capital, have to do with housing. No? And not only from the sense of because housing is a business, but how housing can be instrumentalized to make more money without the use of the housing. Let me explain what we mean, or what I mean. If you realize that that somewhere in the late 1980s, a bunch of bankers, large institutions, met in Basel, Switzerland, to decide that they would allow housing to become lending collateral. What does this mean? This means that a bank, as you know, a bank needs to have reserves that are in relationship to how much they can lend to others, right? So that they cannot, go bankrupt. But in this decision, which was, again, in the late 80s, they basically agreed that if a bank holds a house, a property, they could use the value of that house as an asset, as collateral against anything they were lending. And this is, one thing that where everything began. In reality, the current state, not that before we didn't have problems, but the problems that neoliberalism, the intensity of the problems that neoliberalism brought us, are mainly linked to what we call always, and Raquel and everybody calls, the financialization of housing. And I always like to emphasize that the financialization of housing was a decision of banks to do this, right? It was not something that pre-existed this decision, right? Housing was not able to be used before the decision as a collateral, right? And you can imagine the forces that this simple decision unleashed, not only on banks, but also on other kinds of financial institutions, in order to have housings as assets. Now, another thing that this does is that once you have a house that provides, let's say, Paula's house is worth $1 million. I don't think so, Paula, but if it does, great, But let's assume that Paula's house is $1 million. This means that a bank can say or can claim that they hold $1 million in property. And they can lend according to that collateral. But what it also means is that the bank in their collaterals already says and mentions that the house has a surplus. So basically that it will gain value with time. And banks provide formulas. So they basically say, look, Paula's house is going to be $1 million, 200,000 in 5 years. So some banks, actually all of them, started to make operations with futures, right? With the future bidding on the price of housing, saying that all housing will actually go up in the prices, no? And as a matter of fact, the majority of non-banks, but of regular people, think the same, right? If Paula, sorry to use your Paula as an example, but if Paula wins $1 million in the lottery, most certainly, let's say Paula is not Paula, but it's another Paula, kind of like Paula, will be investing in a property, right? Because since we are very young, people tell us that the safest form of investment is a house, and that the house will always be on the rise in value. Now, and so imagine that not only the people that, regular people, normal people do this, but imagine the scale in which a bank is able to do this, right? Now, the prices, let's assume that yes, all housing prices go up. So this means that housing prices never go down, right? According to them, which puts actually the majority of global population in a very big problem, right? It puts them in a situation that your salary, the moment they decided to do this, our salary needed to be going up at the same rate that they were speculating the houses will go up. And of course, that never happened. No? So the crisis that we face has to do a lot, in part, that we cannot afford a property. And that is in the private market. Of course, that's with a private property. The salaries that we earn cannot allow us to own anything. At least myself, I live in New York City, and in New York, we can. I'm a professor and I do other things. My salary, I think, is decent. I have a decent, modest life, but not even close. I could afford not even a small room in New York, right? And so that creates another market that has been on the rise for already 20, 25 years, which is the rental market, which I will get to that. No? And so on one, I want to go back to the idea that the housing prices continue to go up. No? Most of the new population, the younger people or the people that were displaced or the people that were moving to a different place, and anyone that didn't have a house, right, when the prices started to go up, due to this neoliberal turn, will be in a big trouble, right? Because, of course, our salaries didn't go up. Now, this is a big issue. But for me, the biggest actually of all these issues is that also the housing prices can never come down, because if you are a bank and you have, let's say, 1,000 houses and you're using the value of that 1,000 houses as collateral, right? You really don't want the housing prices to come down, because it will put you in trouble. This means that whatever money you lent already cannot be, like paired up with the reserves that you have, right? And this also pushes the idea which is incredibly stupid, where people start talking about affordable housing, when people start to talk about the possibility of lowering housing prices. And the thing that drives me more crazy than anything else in this specific situation is they believe on the supply and demand theories. Specifically, a group of American, well, it's already all over the world, but they started in the United States that are called YIMBYs, right? The yes in my backyard. People that claim, even today in the housing crisis, that the solution, because that's what they say, the solution to the housing crisis is, of course, to build more housing, right? Now, it would be great in a very different kind of economic situation, but in a situation where housing is a collateral for loans, this is literally impossible. You will build more, but housing prices cannot come down, right? I mean, I'm talking as a general global agenda. Of course, certain neighborhoods in certain spaces for many different reasons might the property come down. Let's say San Francisco, downtown San Francisco, for many reasons, pandemic, etc. Some buildings have come down in value. In New York, the same. For example, the Chrysler building has come down in value, but the building next to it, which is called One Vanderbilt, is one of the most expensive buildings around the world. So I guess what I'm trying to argue is that the general logic that capital uses to convince us that it's still possible within the rules of the market to produce affordable housing. And we honestly believe it's not possible. The only way that we can produce affordable housing is to remove it from the market, right? Market under the current structures of finance cannot produce it. And it has shown us that it cannot produce it, you know? And in terms of the scales that we need. Now, this brings me to the other topic, which is what Paula asked me to talk a lot about, which is on rental questions, right? Now, if Miguel, myself, I'm not able to afford a house in New York, in the market, if I believe in private property and I want to have a property, of course, I will be renting, right? This turn created the largest housing rental market that we had ever seen, right? In a kind of modernist, postmodern world where it was the belief, I mean, I'm sure that in Brazil, because I've been there, there's a sacred, thing for private property, no? And that the way to actually live is to own a house. So if I cannot afford a house, if Paula cannot afford a house, if all of the students that I have cannot afford a house, if pretty much everyone that is new will never be able to afford a house, like my friends in Spain, some activists say, no tendrás casa en tu puta vida. No, it's like in your fucking life, you will never have a house. This specific thing, of course, opened up what I think is the most perverse market today, which is the financialization of rental housing, right? Of course, that's what capital does, right? It goes from like devouring one sector, which already it has done with the private ownership, and now with all of this is moving into the space of the people that are more vulnerable in this case. Well, of course, we have more vulnerable people, but the ones that need to rent because they cannot afford to buy, right? And so the finance industry now has managed to find a very good model to actually rent. And the situation is so extreme that, for example, in Mexico City, a city very comparable of the size of Sao Paulo, right? More or less around that, around 90% of all new developments of housing, 90% are rental housing, right? And this puts people in a very precarious, much more precarious situation, because whether or not, I don't like private property, but there, since the origins of Roman law and private property and the constitutions, liberal constitutions that our countries have, there are protections for private property owners. I mean, there's kind of certain security, right? The majority of us that rent, there are no protections. There are very, very few countries around the world that protect people that rent. And so it sets the stage for, of course, a massive global displacement of people. And later you fall into the next ladder, which is homelessness, or living with your parents, or any other form of precarious living that we are seeing that it's augmenting and multiplying in many cities around the world. So once we have financialized, let's say, rental housing, I'm sure that you've all heard of businesses like Blackstone, which is the most emblematic of all of these businesses, which owns hundreds of thousands of rental properties around the world. These businesses, which they're not banks, they're organizations that dedicated to buy properties in stress. The majority emerged during the 2008 financial crisis, that have realized that owning houses could make not only more money in case like you rent a house. Actually, in many cases, what they are less interested is in the money they get from renting a house. Because what financialization has allowed is that if you're a company that owns property, you can actually claim that your portfolio, the value of your company, is worth as much as the future value of your properties. No? So let's say that a new company has 5 houses, and the 5 houses right now are worth $1 million each. So that company has $5 million in assets. They can claim that in the future, that's $7 million in or $8 million of assets. And guess what? They go to a bank and they can get money for these. Or even worse, they bid with that money on other futures and other things. And this is a phenomenon that David Harvey and myself talk that we doubt that Karl Marx ever imagined, that it would happen. I mean, the situation where what he would call fixed capital in his time, it was, well, if, for example, I will put the example of my mother. My mother, when my father died, they had a larger house. She doesn't want to live in the house. She's been trying to sell it for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and she hasn't been able to sell the house. That is a little bit what Marx thought of what fixed capital was. It was a capital that it was not easy to move around, that it was fixed in something. It was a material capital. Well, in the current climate of housing financialization, that does not exist anymore. The idea that housing, for my mother, it does, but not for these corporations, right? That the idea that housing is fixed capital, forget about it. I'm already taking a loan because I have big portfolios, right? I get more investments. I get all of that. So the value of the house, it's actually extracted more from financializing this value than from the actual rent. And that puts us also in an even more precarious situation, which all of you know about. That is what produces many, many, many buildings that don't have residents, right? I'm in Cairo, and those of you that don't know, one of the absolute most crazy developments that that exist in the world is the creation of New Cairo. So the current president decided to make a new city, and this new city is for 6 million people. 6 million. Okay, that's enormous. It is said that today they finished it. The city is finished. It looks a bit like a mini Dubai, something like that. It is said that today that city only has 30,000 residents. So the city is for 6 million and only has 30,000 residents. And I could go to where I live in New York, and where we see many of the big towers without lights at night, where nobody lives in them, right? Because what the owner of that property wants is the financialized value of the property, and he couldn't give a damn about it if somebody lived in it. As a matter of fact, in many cases, they become a nuisance, they become a problem. If you live in a property, it's problems, right? So you might as well make money without people inside of it, right? In short, the financialization of housing has brought housing as close as we can think of a regular trading commodity where it has lost its use value for the use of capital. And right now, currently, is majoritarily an exchange value proposition. And this is, I think, for us, without doubt, the most urgent space to work on in relationship to housing rights and so forth. It's not in the community organizing, although we like that. It's not in the cooperative, production, although we do that and we love it, right? This is something that we actually like. Is not in the land trust space, but it is actually in influencing governments to prohibit or to curtail the involvement of finance in housing. As a matter of fact, I mean, we've been telling the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, the new one, that the first action, most important action, is that she declares that banks can no longer use Mexican property as collateral, right? And that will be, of course, is not the only thing we need, but we think it's a very urgent demand. The other space that we always think that is very, I guess, dramatic is another that very few of us know, which is the involvement of artificial intelligence in the finance speculation of property. So for already many years, banks and financial institutions, large ones, have been investing in the creation of algorithms to determine future values, current values, to determine if a person is going to be able to afford or not afford, basically to help them make more profit, right? And again, this is irrespective of if somebody lives there or not, or of course, they don't give a damn about humanity or humans living somewhere. And the production of these algorithms have been driving a very perverse sort of second stage of financialization that needs to be stopped. And this second stage of financialization is coming very fast because, as you know, the development, I mean, what is it? 2 years ago, we didn't have ChatGPT, right? And now most of the world uses that thing. And it's a very fast development. And people don't realize that artificial intelligence is nothing more than the algorithm production through the aggregation of data. And the data that all these banks have, the data that all of these financial institutions have, together with all the data that the renters have given them and the owners have given them, are producing the most perverse algorithms which command and tell financial institutions and corporations and landlords what to do with property to make it more profitable, right? And so I want to open that when we have the discussion after I finish my talk, to discuss a lot on this, right? Now, on the other hand, if we or you are not able to go and talk to Lula, right, and say, Lula, man, you have to stop, like the financialization and housing because it's destroying it. I mean, we know that it's in a very bad situation. There are other things that you can do, and we do them, right? I mentioned that we are very invested in supporting cooperative production because cooperatives, as you know, make housing as a non-speculative instrument. The cooperatives that are outside, of course, of capitalism, that would be the same with land trust and with other forms of collective property and co-housing. That is something we do a lot. And currently, our latest sort of support for the Mexican government has been to produce a rent stabilization law. Many cities in the north have rent stabilization laws. If you're not familiar with these, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with the whole housing situation, but it means that there are certain policies that do not permit landlords to raise prices of rents, which is great. That I live in New York City in one of those. It's a rent stabilized apartment, and it's fantastic because I know that I'm not going to be, displaced next year because the landlord wants to raise my rent 10% or 20% or 50% and sometimes even 100%. So my landlord can only raise my rent 3%, which is a lot. That's per year, but still it's limited. No? And so cities like Mexico City have a big housing problem because of the speculation that I've been talking about. Temporary rentals, which is what we were talking today about, which are used for speculation, Airbnbs and all of that. And Mexico has decided to make some kind of rent stabilization. We help them develop this. We produce already a report and all of that, and then entering in different stages. They're very serious about it. I honestly think that Sao Paulo should also work on this, and I'm sure some of you are already working on it. But I want to specify something. These can only be thought of as temporary measures to ameliorate a crisis. But these instruments are not going to solve or change the situation because financialization is expanding, right? You're limiting it, but it's still occurring. And then finance, as you know, will find other spaces to work around. The same has happened with all the Airbnb spaces where they just find all the loopholes, no matter how many regulations you put at front. And so anything that we can think of as a measure to stop the speculation, if we want the absolute true, like a ultra radical proposition, is to stop finance. But of course, in the meantime, we have to also think of instruments that we see as temporary, right? That could ameliorate the crisis. So working in these two things, a more feasible, more immediate sort of attention to the problem, but also being very aware that this is not going to transform the situation. It's just putting brakes in the situation, right? And that the forms of fighting capital in form finance are the most important, and also the production of a different kind of property system that allows non-speculative property to thrive, right? And that is also another thing that we are supporting the Mexican government to create a property system that Mexicans can utilize, and within 50, 100 years, it will be much more on the par with private property, right? To put our energy in the promotion of non-speculative property as a way to deal with the housing crisis in a medium and long term. I feel like I've been talking a lot, and I would like to have a discussion. I think I have covered the majority of the things I wanted to say. I'm sorry you had to look at my face all the time, but I didn't see pertinent to put graphics and all these kinds of things because it changes my train of thought. Thank you very much, and I'm all ears to answer and to have a discussion about these things that I just put forth. Thank you.
Obrigada, Miguel. Eu vou fazer alguns
Thank you,
comentários.
Miguel. And I'll make some comments.
Peraí.
Just a second. Let me pick original sound. Can you hear me well?
Eu vou fazer alguns comentários e a gente coletou
I will make a few comments, and we have collected a few questions. We have two broadcasts on YouTube and here, and I think we can have kind of a conversation, right, Miguel? What do you think? The issue that was addressed yesterday is Trump's victory. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about what would housing policies look like in Latin America in the current scenario. You talked about the governments. We have center-left governments that are progressive, but that don't face up to private property and the privilege of private property. And we have Argentina, with the far liberal right in government liberating the and eliminating the regulation of rent, letting living tenants unsupported. Can you give us some inspiring words to provoke our creativity and our imagination towards a fairer future? I wanted to hear you a little bit about this.
I don't know why, but I never understand Portuguese, and now I am understanding, and I'm glad because I still cannot see the translation, but I can get all that you've been talking about, Paula. Asking um, the the night of the elections with Trump. It was um, it was a very long day because I was in Cairo, and Cairo is 7 hours ahead. And I could not sleep. I did not sleep. It was 2 days ago, and I woke up with a tremendous anxiety, with sadness, and with many friends from around the world writing, and saying, this is horrible, and this is, that. So it was very ominous and sad day. And then that evening, after being out in the World Women Forum and having dinner with friends that trying to like hug me and try to be, I guess, caring, because I was very sad. I arrived to a hotel and I called David Harvey. Right. And David had sent me a message early that day, and that message was very strong. And David, and I said, I need to talk to David because if anyone makes me feel a little bit better, it's him. And I will read the message that he sent to me. And he says, Miguel, come back. We need you. The liberal Democrats have been crushed, and this is a big chance for the left. Okay. It was only until I talked to him that I actually feel a bit, I wouldn't say happy, because I'm not happy, of course, that Trump is in power, but I am more, much more looking forward to a Trump presidency, because we must realize that what we have been defending or going for as a model against fascism is very much liberal democracy that is rooted on, of course, capitalism. Um, the the Democratic Party in the United States, which is the same as many parties, that masquerade as left in different countries, they're really not left, right? And it had put me in a position that I was supporting Kamala Harris, of course, and people say, yes, of course, you have to go for Kamala but it is really ridiculous because the Democratic Party, Kamala, and all of what they represent have made so much damage to the world, had produced so much environmental destruction, so much death, right? That I don't think is comparable to whatever Trump did in his stupid 4 years where he was around, right? And if anything, what Trump is doing is putting into words, in very stupid words, because the guy is very stupid. Well, it might not be, right? What the Americans have been doing all the time and what our governments have been copying, right? Because we believed in that kind of freedom, because we believed in that kind of liberal democracy, because we believed in the things that are immediate to us, which are more into rights of identity situations. It's like let's go for gender equalities. Let's go for, which, yes, we should, right? But beneath that, capital was always there. And I think that Trump, and it could have been someone else, right? In this case, sadly, this stupid person became the one, was the ultimate consequence And perhaps Bolsonaro was also the ultimate consequence of the liberal parties, the liberal elites focusing on very few people to make them rich. People were abandoned all of these things with gender rights, where they ignored, right, all of this. And I could argue that half of American population is stupid because they voted for Trump. But I think that would be very arrogant of me to say this. This is half. Alex, you're talking about half of the voting population of a large country of 450 million people did not want, right? For whatever reason. The sad part is, of course, what they proposed is xenophobia. What they proposed is, of course, racism. It all was with hate. But if we don't learn that what we have been proposing is not wanted, then we're really damned. I think this is a very important moment, at least in America and the United States, and to reconsider what we have been doing, because honestly, we have not been doing it well. Because look at where we are, right? And because I think we have off effort in more modest and what David Harvey was basically telling me is, Miguel, wake up. The others were not also okay, right? They were like they used the right words, right? And they also kind of. But I'm always reminded that Obama was a person that deported more Mexicans. By the way, I'm Mexican. Than any president ever. I mean, not even Trump. I mean, not even close. These things that they use, right, to continue making them in the world, including, of course, wars, invasions, etc. So, in short, Paula, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Trump and who knows if Jair Bolsonaro will come back, or Milei, or all these figures that are appearing, also Italy, and most certainly France will become fascistic, and it will be a horrible time. I'm not saying that it's fine. I mean, I'm also concerned. I'm very concerned. But we have to wake up. I mean, we have to put forward, some serious radical alternatives, because these people also put some serious radical alternatives, the ones that we don't want, right? And we're very timid, right? So, for example, here in the Urban Forum, all my talks, people tell me, and I've been just going like, the problem is the capitalists, the problem is the billionaires, this is, the finance industry, the developers. And I've been in forums where people from the World Bank and all these things are there. But, we have to start, pointing to the situation. We have to really start seriously constructing visions, new visions, which I don't know what they are, for an eco-socialist future that people identify with. Because the left that we have now, clearly people don't identify with, right? And so we can convince ourselves that the people are stupid, right? But I think we are more stupid because we continue to be very arrogant, saying, oh, they don't understand, they're stupid, they're not smart. But what we actually have failed to do is push new imaginaries. I include myself in this, of course. And so I hope that this is how we all react, right? That this is a very good moment to restructure, to reconvene, if we don't want to perish. I mean, this is terrible for the environment. I mean, Trump will destroy all forms of, environmental protections. This is terrible, of course, for all migrants, including myself. I'm honestly thinking of leaving the United States, so I might be a refugee very soon. It really a disaster, right? But we needed something like this to wake up and to understand that neoliberalism could not conclude in any. Harvey told me, this was predicted by Marx. I mean, of course, he would say that to me because he says, but it's very true. The end form of capitalism is fascism, right? And we are now in that phase, and we have to realize that if we don't become staunch anti-capitalists in all directions, this is basically going to be our future for a long time, and of course a lot of people will suffer. I don't know if I addressed your question, Paula, but I got
Ah,
two.
totalmente, totalmente. E que bom, né? Eu sempre
You
brinco que os
definitely
livros
did.
do
You
David Harvey,
definitely did.
eles dão uma
I
voz
always say that David
cética, uma
Harvey's
esperança,
book,
né? Eu acho que ele faz isso para
they
poder ser crítico, inclusive, né? Trazer uma. Que
that
bom
he does this
que
to be critical.
eu acho
And
que realmente a gente não está
well,
sabendo ler, né, o que está
I
acontecendo.
think that we are not
Tem
able
gap
to
de
read what's
comunicação. A
happening,
gente segue
and there
propondo as
is a
mesmas
communication
coisas, eles
gap.
estão falando, olha, não é por aí, né?
We are
Não é
proposing
por
the
aí.
same things,
Mas,
and they
Miguel,
say, well,
trazendo aqui
it's
algumas
not quite like
perguntas,
that.
porque a
But
gente está num
Miguel,
seminário
some
sobre o
questions are
aluguel,
coming in because we are in a
políticas de
seminar about
aluguel.
rent,
E a gente passou
rent
vários dias
policies,
aqui já
and we spent several
ouvindo
days
sobre a
listening
financiarização da
to
moradia, a
people
housing as
about the
an asset,
financialization of
a
housing,
collateral,
housing as an
e
asset
a
or
crescente
as
opção do
collateral,
aluguel
and
por
the
alquiler,
growing
e a
alternative
financiarização do aluguel, blá blá blá.
of rent and
E
the
uma pessoa perguntou no
financialization
chat,
of rent. And
bom,
a person asked
se o
in the
aluguel
chat,
está tão
well,
financiarizado,
if
por
rent
que que a
is
gente tem
so
que pensar uma
financialized,
política de aluguel?
why do we need to
Por que
think about a
pensar numa
rent
política de aluguel?
policy?
E aí é claro
Why
que eu
think
tenho uma
about a
pergunta,
rent
tenho uma
policy?
resposta, mas eu queria ouvir a sua.
And I have an
Eu
answer, but I wanted
inclusive
to hear
puxo essa
yours.
pergunta com outra que eu
And
recebi
I will
aqui,
even add another
que
question
é
with to another one that
vocês
came up
têm
here,
proposto coisas para aluguel, né?
which
Comenta um
is
pouco,
you
porque me
have
parece
made
que
proposals related to rent, right?
a gente está
Um,
querendo
can you tell me
enfrentar
more about
os
this? Because
desafios,
it
né?
seems
E a
like we're trying to
gente
tackle
fica
the
feliz de
challenges,
saber
and
o que que vocês
we're
acham que pode ser um
happy
próximo passo numa agenda
to
para
we
pensar uma
to
política de
hear
aluguel.
whatever you think may be the next step in the agenda to think about a rent policy.
Yes, that's a very nice question, the first one, right? Why do we have to continue thinking about rent? I think rent in our cultures, and I know that Brazil shares very much the Mexican culture and the adoration for private property. Um, I mean, I remember like pulling my hair when the Mia Casa, Mia Tua Vida was or Mia Vida happened, you know, and that the purpose of that um, was basically private titles, private property, or where all the programs for the what they call the regularization of favelas, right, happened. That the regularization meant to give private property, and it was also it's private property is like king in without doubt. Now, with rent, it's a very different relationship. See, uh, in many countries, not ours. So, but I will put as an example many countries, some Asian countries, a lot of European countries, in New York City, um, in Canada, also in certain urban areas. There is more rental than property. As a matter of fact, there are moments in time where certain countries did not have a developed private market for housing, and where the majority of the population rented. We have, of course, the typical example like Vienna, right, which is resounded all the time. It's impossible to replicate, so I don't even want to even go that, right? But you know, something that is less kind of emblematic. You know, when I arrived to the Netherlands in 2004, um, I would say 70 to 80% of the population just rented, and then the other part of the population, you know, were owners or live in some other kind of arrangement. By the time I left the Netherlands, which was 2010, um, even my students of it's actually an undergrad degree because in Europe you can have a master's after 4 years, which is kind of strange, but anyway. So my young students were buying property, and the Netherlands managed to shift the logic that they were renters, people were renters, into the logic that everybody had to have a mortgage. Again, pick this up, finance, right? Um, Another example that I want to give is in Chile, when Pinochet was the dictator, the ruler. One of the most important actions he did was to provide housing to a lot of people. And Franco, the other fascist dictator from Spain, did the same. But they did it under a private property scheme. In Chile, as you all know, Pinochet was being advised by the group of economists from the Chicago School, the neoliberal school, and by advisors from Margaret Thatcher and Reagan and so on economic matters. And they pushed Pinochet to create the first mortgage market, a mortgage market, which is what happened to the European Union, right? Um, and again, is to put people into debt through a finance mechanism. Now, so why people were renting before and it was okay? I'm not, actually, it was. Rent was, housing was just seen as something that you have to pay for maintenance. You pay a certain small charge, whatever it is. For example, in the Netherlands, most people were paying, I don't know, 600 euros, 800 euros a month, which at that time, and it was very little for the average, person there. And they all could have a very decent apartment because housing was outside of the real estate market. It was outside of the speculative market. And also because the Netherlands or Sweden or in this case New York also, out of all places, they had a very strong rent protection laws. In short, there was no need for me to own anything because I would never be fired. I mean, displaced from my house. I would just have the use of my house, right? And people were fine with this, right? In our today's society, of course, it's very difficult to comprehend this, not to comprehend that in order to enjoy where you live, to cook where you live, to have sex where you live, to watch the TV where you live, you in order to really enjoy it, you need to own something. It was not the case, and this was because there was a very strong protection and system that created equal housing, let's say, or equal offers of housing, etc. I know that the scale of especially Europe that I'm talking about, is not the same as the scale of Mexico City and Sao Paulo, but that's also why I talk about New York City, right? I live in a rent stabilized apartment that, in theory, they could change the laws. I'm protected, and I don't feel the need of owning. And I have a contract with the city, not with well, with both. There's a kind of like a private public thing, but it's with the city that I sign, right? And then I have these protection laws, and then I just pay a fee, which is an exorbitant amount of money still. But you see, I guess what I'm trying to get is that rent in itself allows us to think much easier of housing as its use, of not as a speculative instrument. Now, in cooperative structures, that's more or less what happens, right? You are not the owner of your apartment. You're a shareholder, right? And you pay a sum to the cooperative to have access to your house, which for us is a kind of rent. So in short, I think the idea of rent is a bit vilified because, of course, of cultural conditioners, but of the market. So call it whatever it is, but I think what we want is to what we're looking for is to develop policy that would make people be happy with being in a house or in an apartment that is not exchange, that doesn't have an exchange value, right? And then in the previous before neoliberalism, that would be a rent unit, no, a rent housing. So I hope that I more or less answer this. And in the case of the second question or address, Paola, the I mean, yes, we're working a lot in housing space, and it's 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 a contradiction what I'm going to say, but I we have to also work with the tools and instruments and the possibilities that we have at the moment. And it's always very difficult to think on the very short term, in the medium term, in the long term, right? The long term is to remove all housing in the planet from speculation. Of course, that's the goal, right? But in the short term, we have to work with the possibilities that we have. If Claudia Sheinbaum, right now, the president of Mexico, says to everyone, we're going to socialize all property, she will be crucified. I mean, she wouldn't last a day, right? And so politicians obviously need to have, a slow, sort of policy, right? And we're very okay with that. We are aware that that is sadly, the position. We hope that the climate crisis will create so much crisis that they will have to go faster, right? I mean, like, yes, let's do more. But the type of work that we are doing with Mexico or with the Netherlands or with Ecuador is mostly amelioration policy. Also policy that, like I was talking about, which is rent stabilization. I mean, rent stabilization has to be done. Like it's kind of like a first wall or a first instrument, right? That you do it. And then many cities have succeeded on this. Many haven't, by the way. I mean, some cities that have implemented house rent stabilization are having a lot of problems because they did not implement it well, or they made the instruments very complicated. For example, the French. The French have incredibly complicated instruments. Of course, we studied all of them because we are developing this policy for a government. And so we studied, Barcelona, New York, Berlin, Paris, London. I mean, all most cities that have some form of rent stabilization, and I must say it calms down the market, but it doesn't calm it completely, right? But it's a measure, and it's a measure that can be done that is not so politically damaging for a politician. It's problematic, yes, when they announced that they were doing rent stabilization. Of course, the right-wing media went crazy, the right-wing politicians, they're going to become Chavez, they're going to, socialize, they're going to remove everything. My mother called me and say, they're saying that they're going to take away our property. And it's like, the kinds of things that I'm sure you all lived in Brazil. But the reality is that it is very important that we work on these short-term, less radical sort of initiatives in order to stop a little bit, or to put brakes on this very expansive and fast way in which capital is developing at the moment. Now, our wish is that with the Mexican government, we could actually work more closely and with more intensity, which we are, but who knows where that will take us, into implementing a law that allows for specific kinds of social property uh, in the constitution of the Mexican state, right? And so we want to see the possibility of enshrining and giving rights to those people that want to experiment with social property schemes. Now this is not in the constitution currently, and we believe that together with developing trainings and schools and working with grassroots movements and social movements, we would permit a lot of people to start experimenting with other forms of living which are not private property. Now, that transformation will happen in the mid term and long term, right? This is not going to be a fast thing. I have been very surprised that even people from the left in Mexico, in the government, have asked me, but Miguel, explain me what is this cooperative thing? because it does not exist. Well, it does exist, but there's a very limited number of attempts of building a cooperative, but the laws don't protect them. There's not a legal framework to allow them to thrive. Our medium and long-term goal is to provide or to create that legal framework, that institutional framework, so that they can thrive, to provide the instruments so that other people and grassroots groups can take them and actually make their own sort of ideas of what the future of housing should be. But sadly, at the moment, if Paula and I want to build a cooperative in Mexico, it would not really be possible, right? Because it's just not there. The legal apparatus is not there. And of course, the financial, the not financial, the economic apparatus is also another very important thing. How are we going to build all of this if it's, because normally we go for banking. So another long proposition, it's not only for housing, is that Mexico is starting to develop social banks, and they already have developed 6 social development banks, which basically take money out of taxation into these specific kind of banks that don't have as a goal speculation, but on the opposite function as what a bank should be. Uh, and so the economic apparatus is also something that we are looking into. And I've already talked about the knowledge, the apparatus, which is the training and the curricula that needs to also change in universities, but also in grassroots community groups, to begin to experiment with all of these new forms that can happen. Yeah?
Ah, muito bom, Miguel. Você adiantou algumas respostas. Eu vou ler as questões aqui para.
Thank you, Miguel. You've already answered a few of our questions. And Nathi Lelis, for example, asks, how can we think the construction of a social perspective or popular perspective of the collective in Latin America, in which the property, ideology, and individualism are pillars of the development model? You spoke about this shift from the property and to rental. And she asked, can we think about the right to housing without that in this individualistic ideology we live in? And Beatriz also comments, I'm going to gather some of these questions, but I have a set of questions that work the idea of an intermediary agenda. What can I do while I haven't taken housing out of the market? And you spoke about 2 paths. One of them is to the stabilization of rent. And we have several comments about saying that the rent control is not so effective, that oftentimes the rent is still a stage towards private properties and then private ownership. And what are the challenges to establish this kind of social rent? Do we have to create an ideological consensus and then have an impact on the market, like the agenda being a stage, a step towards that? And we have other questions that look at this intermediary agenda when housing leaves the market, like non-speculative housing experiences, cooperatives with equity that are democratic. And the challenges arise from how to escalate this model, how to expand these pilot experiences that seem exceptions and show how they are spreading and then leading and provoking a new model. I would summarize the questions and this perspective and this intermediary agenda. What it is it stabilization? What are the challenges to that? Is it collective property, collective ownership? What are the challenges? We have a few more minutes, Miguel, to conclude. So if you would like to make your final remarks, I would like to thank you, and I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone that asked these questions. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to address completely all of them, but the the thing that occurs to me as I was listening to what you're talking is that um, there are, I mean, rent stabilization is not the only kind of immediate thing that can be done. I want to stress that it has to be a combination of things. And this is also something we told the Mexican government. Whether they will do it or not, it's yet to be seen. But you cannot have just rent stabilization and you know, it has to be a series of tactics and strategies that are implemented in unison to really have the fastest impact on rentals and then of also owners.
May I point one thing also? Rent stabilization, we never had it in Latin America.
No, this will be the
We
first
never
one.
control.
Yeah.
So it's something
Yeah.
like, feels like it will people don't like because they have a house in rental market, or they think that house could be a retirement project, or they complement their salary, so they look like, how will you control my rent? I think it's a very Latin American point. You freeze,
think,
but now you're back.
yeah, I'm back. It's the internet, sorry. Mhm. Yes, so I was saying that the multiplicity of tactics that we think of are, for example, we're also trying to convince and to develop the basis necessary of how would a taxation of large landowners should be. This is a very important sort of also progressive instrument. So fiscal policy, I mean, there's a lot in that space that needs to be, I guess, invented because instrument like how we could use fiscal policy to the another thing that is very important to do is that we have to start to put penalties into people that keep their properties vacant for more than X amount of time. And so if you have you're an owner and your property does not rent in 3 months, you start paying, right? It costs you. And then of course, what happens to that money? Well, hopefully goes back to a pool that produces more housing, etc. But these are things that actually would make property values go down. And of course, imagine the damage that this would do to the finance industry. Because if you are forced to rent and you cannot rent, it's because it's too expensive, right? So this is also a very nice instrument to think of in parallel, right, to this. And there's a lot. I think there's many instruments that we can think that could, you know, start putting brakes. But again, it's not going to resolve the long-term situation at all. And we must be very honest with that, right? These are just utilizing the instruments of liberal democracy, which is law, specifically the Roman law that we all inherited, right? And use that in order to kind of put brakes into the same thing. But really, we are talking about instruments or developing conceptions that are not part of what already exists, no? and and that is what is required, and of course we might have some very stupid ideas about how to do that, but that's what we have to do. I mean, so we can put a lot of effort, yes, on the typical or the what would be kind of people would call solutions. We tend not to believe in solutions because things always change. But this is, I think, a very dramatic also shift in the many of us that needs to happen, that a big part of what we do needs to be put in things that don't exist, in the imaginary and in the construction of something else. And I want to stress the following, and perhaps this is my closing argument. We have to, I guess, realize, we have to accept that we will not be alive when the change we want to see will happen. We have to see ourselves as temporary agents for the acceleration of the eco-socialism to come. I, and also David Harvey, don't believe, and this is a big issue that David has with a lot of the left, we don't believe in immediate revolutions. I'm right now in Egypt. I mean, those of you might remember that they had this spring, and look at where they ended, right? The Russian Revolution, many thinkers from the left have already said this was not really a revolution, right? Perhaps the Paris Commune would be a revolution, right? But capitalism has been building itself to this point where we have Donald Trump and Bolsonaro for 500 years. 500 years. It's a highly sophisticated system that took 500 years to develop. And if we don't see ourselves as these agents of the building of a system that commenced in the 19th century, which is, whatever you call communism or some kind of anarchism, some kind of alternative to capitalism, then, we're just idealists, right? I really don't think I will see any sort of result of revolution. I don't think David would also see this, right? So we work in what we can work, which are these short, medium-term measures, but also work on imagining something that our grandkids, if we survive the climate catastrophe, will enact in a much better form. Well, so if I were you, I would stop thinking of let's build a revolution, let's go to the streets and everything will change. No, it won't, right? The international policy instruments, if you start working with the government and you realize that the World Trade Organization has signed an agreement with the country for the previous president, the country cannot do anything about it, right? I mean, it's a very long form of dismantling, all of these instruments. However, as history has told us, a big crisis can accelerate this. Now, many of us at the beginning might have thought that COVID was the one. And look what COVID did. It created the largest amount of billionaires ever. It accumulated the most trillion dollars that ever existed just in the time of the crisis, right? So perhaps World War, if we survive it, catastrophes such as, this is what happened in the Second World War, when modernism and all of that thing happened. It still was capitalism, of course. But we all think that it's either a war against artificial intelligence or the largest sort of climate crisis that we are yet to live that might trigger a faster acceleration of something else. But for the moment, this is what we have. And so we have to realize that what we can do with what we have, and how we can accelerate, again, any form of eco-socialism or communism or anarchism or anarcho-feminism, whatever you want to call it, right? That is your imaginary. We need to work on that too. So yeah, that would be my closing argument. Mm-hmm.
Muito, muito obrigado, Miguel, pelo seu
Thank you very much, Miguel, for your political positioning, but especially for this hopeful talk that opened this space for hope and imagination and steps and ways that help us think the state and the policies as part of this process for us to achieve and reach this demercantilized, decommercialized future. Let's advance towards it. And I would also like to thank everybody for their comments and questions. I would like to invite you to tomorrow start this effort at 10:30 a.m. to think about rental policies with a panel on social rental in association with other policies, health policies, policies for the elderly, gender policies, and others. And in the afternoon, we will have a panel on emergency policies. You spoke much about eco-socialism, climate change, and how it affects, and maybe rent can be a response to this world that we don't know where is heading. And then we will have the closing remarks. But thank everyone here. Miguel, thank you very much. See you
Thank you
later.
very
See
much.
you
I cannot
soon.
wait to start working and helping and supporting Bules or Boles. So I always get it wrong. Um, in Sao Paulo, if that ever, materializes or any other sort of form, I mean, you know that you have an ally, right, with us over here and around. So
Thank you,
thank you.
Miguel. Thank you so much. Bye bye.